The evening had started in the simplest way possible. He stepped into the small restaurant mostly because it was on his route home and he didn't feel like cooking anything. The place wasn't fancy, and that was one of the reasons he liked it. The wooden chairs were a little worn, the walls held old framed photos, and the lights were warm enough to make the space feel calm. Nothing about it demanded attention. It felt like the kind of place where people came to breathe for a moment after a long day. He took a seat at a corner table, the one he usually chose when he wanted quiet. From there, he could see almost the whole room. A family sat near the window. Two friends chatted at the counter. A couple shared a small dessert. Everything looked normal, and for a moment he felt grateful for that. There were days when he enjoyed ordinary moments more than exciting ones. A waitress approached him, holding a small notebook. She looked like she had been on her feet all day, but she still managed a polite smile. Her movements were quick, but not rushed. She asked him what he would like, and he answered with the same thing he usually ordered. She nodded gently and went back toward the kitchen. As he waited, he took out his phone, but didn't do much with it. He scrolled through a few messages, checked the time, and then put it away again. He wasn't in the mood for screens. He let his eyes wander around the room, noticing little details he usually ignored. The soft hum of voices, the clinking of plates from the kitchen, the old speaker near the wall playing a slow tune. It wasn't loud, but it added a bit of life to the place. He watched the waitress for a moment as she moved from table to table. She seemed young, maybe in her early 20s. She carried plates with steady hands, greeted customers with small smiles, and kept checking on the older man sitting 2 tables away. Nothing about her stood out at first, but something about her calm dedication caught his attention. He didn't think deeply about it. He simply noticed, when his food arrived, the aroma warmed him a little. He thanked her, and she smiled again before hurrying away. He took a bite, appreciating how simple but comforting the meal was. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Outside, the sky had turned a darker shade of blue. Clouds were gathering slowly, almost like they were trying not to be noticed. People walked past the windows with umbrellas ready in their hands. The air outside had that feeling before rain, when everything seems to hold still for a moment. He continued eating, listening to the faint music playing from the speaker. The song changed, something slow and slightly old-fashioned. It fit the atmosphere in a surprising way. The restaurant always felt peaceful around this hour. Not empty, just quiet. Like everyone inside understood that they were all taking a small break from their own busy lives halfway through his meal. The lights flickered. It was quick, no more than a second, but everyone noticed it. The speaker went silent immediately after. The quiet that followed felt heavier than before. A few people exchanged glances. The manager walked out from the back and tapped the side of the speaker as if the problem were that simple. It didn't work. Without the music, the silence seemed to stretch across the room. People went back to their conversations, but their voices felt softer, more hesitant. He took another bite of food, trying to act normal. Even though he felt the same awkward pause everyone else felt, the waitress returned to check if everything was okay with his meal. He nodded, and she thanked him before moving again. As she walked toward the manager, he saw her say something quietly. The manager listened for a moment, then looked toward the corner of the room. There was an old upright piano there. He didn't know how he had missed it before. Maybe he had seen it once and forgotten, or maybe it had always blended into the background. The wood was dark and polished, but slightly scratched at the edges. A small lamp sat on top of it. He watched as the waitress placed her notebook on the counter and walked toward the piano. Her steps were soft, almost shy. A few customers noticed her and turned to see what she was doing. She pulled the bench out slowly and sat down. For a second, she just sat there, her hands resting lightly on her knees. The room seemed to grow even quieter. He wondered if she was nervous or if she had done this before. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. Her fingers hesitated for a moment. Then she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost a whisper of a sound, but it was enough to shift the entire energy of the room. A warm, gentle tone filled the air. She pressed another key, then another. The melody grew, slow and steady. Her fingers moved with surprising ease, as if the piano understood her, He sat back, stunned by how natural she looked sitting there. Just a few minutes earlier, she'd been carrying plates from table to table, looking tired but polite. Now, she seemed like someone else entirely. Her shoulders relaxed, her expression softened, and her focus sharpened into something peaceful. People around the restaurant turned their chairs slightly or leaned in closer. The family by the window stopped talking for a moment. The two friends at the counter watched with quiet interest. Even the manager stood still, arms loosely crossed. Listening, the waitress continued playing, and the melody grew richer. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, like the rest of the evening, but full of feeling. Every note carried a warmth that filled the room in a way the speaker never could. He felt something shift inside him. It was a small feeling, something close to calmness, maybe even gratitude. He didn't know what story she held behind her quiet eyes or how long she had been playing, but he could hear something honest in her music, something that came from experience rather than lessons alone. Rain began tapping gently against the windows, adding a soft rhythm to her playing. The sound blended with the melody in a way that felt almost planned as he listened. He almost forgot he had come there simply to eat dinner and go home. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about his long day. He didn't even think about the food cooling on his plate. All he focused on was the unexpected beauty of the moment. She continued playing for a few more minutes, her fingers gliding smoothly across the keys. Her posture was calm, her breathing steady. The music carried a sense of quiet confidence, as if this was a place she understood better than anything else in her life. When she finally paused, the room felt lighter than before. People exchanged small smiles. Even the rain outside seemed softer. She didn't make a big gesture or look around proudly. She simply took a slow breath, placed her hands back on her knees, and sat quietly for a moment before standing and returning to her work. He watched her as she lifted her notebook again and went back to serving tables as if nothing unusual had happened. But the evening no longer felt ordinary. The silence after her playing faded slowly, almost like the last note still hung in the air even though it had already disappeared. People around the room slowly returned to their conversations, but something in their voices had softened. The man in the corner felt the same shift. He didn't know why, but it felt as if the room had taken a deep breath and become lighter. He picked up his fork again. Though the food had gone cooler than he liked, still, he didn't mind. His thoughts kept drifting back to the sound of the piano and how unexpected it had been. It wasn't just that she played well. It was the way her music seemed to touch something gentle inside everyone. The rain outside kept tapping against the windows, adding to the calm that had settled over the place. The waitress walked past him again, carrying a tray of glasses. She looked the same as before, doing her job quietly and steadily. But now that he had seen her at the piano, there was something new he noticed, a calm strength in the way she moved, a quiet confidence in her steps. He wondered if the other customers saw it too. The manager walked over to her and said something. She nodded with a small smile, almost shy, and continued working. It didn't seem like she was used to attention. If anything, she looked relieved that people were getting back to their meals instead of staring at her. A family near the window whispered to each other, and one of the kids pointed at the piano. The mother whispered something back, probably telling him not to bother the waitress about it. The older man 2 tables away clapped softly a few minutes earlier, and he still had a warm smile on his face. The entire restaurant felt a little different now. The air wasn't heavy or awkward. It was peaceful, like everyone had been reminded of something simple and good. He continued eating, but his attention drifted often. He watched the waitress carry plates, refill someone's glass, and bring a slice of cake to a couple celebrating something small. Every time she passed the piano, her eyes flicked toward it for just a second. Not long enough for most people to notice, but long enough for him to see that she loved the instrument deeply. After a while, the speaker near the wall crackled, letting out a broken sound. Someone tapped it again, but it didn't come back to life. A few people laughed softly at the failed attempt. The manager shook his head and gave up. Leaving the room to the quiet sound of rain, the man leaned back in his chair and let himself relax. Something about the moment reminded him that life could still surprise him, even on evenings when he didn't expect anything at all. The waitress approached his table again and glanced at his plate. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, and earlier." "That was really nice." She froze for a moment, almost as if she didn't know how to respond. Then she gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I just didn't want the place to feel too quiet." "Worked," he said. She nodded again, gently, and walked away. She didn't seem like someone who searched for praise. It looked more like she played because something inside her needed to. The door opened, letting in a small gust of cool air and a couple shaking water off their umbrellas. They looked around curiously, maybe sensing the calm atmosphere the moment they stepped inside. They took a seat near the counter, and the waitress went over to hand them menus. He watched her carefully for a moment longer. The way she spoke to customers, the way she listened to what they wanted, it all felt natural. But there was still something quiet and reserved about her. She didn't laugh loudly or talk too much. She simply offered small smiles and gentle words. The type of kindness people often overlooked. The rain picked up, falling harder against the glass. People glanced outside, relieved to be indoors. The restaurant felt warm compared to the cold outside. The man finished his meal and placed his fork down. But he didn't feel like leaving yet. The piano had changed the mood of the whole evening, and he wanted to see how the rest of the night would unfold. A couple sitting behind him whispered softly about the waitresses. "Playing she must have practiced for years," one said. "Maybe. She plays somewhere else too," the other replied. He didn't know whether she did or not. But something told him that she didn't have much time for anything outside of work. There was a look in her eyes earlier, a mix of tiredness and something deeper, that made him think she carried more responsibility than someone her age usually did. The manager walked to the back for a moment, leaving the staff to handle the customers. The waitress wiped down a table near the window, occasionally glancing outside at the rain. When she turned, her eyes landed briefly on the piano again. Her face softened for a moment, almost like the instrument reminded her of a place she missed. He wondered when she learned to play. Was it something she grew up with? Did someone teach her? Or did she simply spend hours teaching herself whenever she had the chance? The way she played earlier didn't feel like something learned from a strict teacher. It felt more personal. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter was the only steady sound in the room. Without the piano or the speaker, the restaurant felt quieter than usual, but not empty. People were comfortable speaking in softer tones. Enjoying the unexpected stillness, he reached for his water and took a slow sip. His thoughts wandered to his own life, the routines he lived every day, and the many evenings he spent rushing through moments without noticing anything special. But tonight felt different. He didn't know if it was because of the music or because of the way it changed the atmosphere. But he felt more present than he had in a long time. The waitress came to the counter to pick up drinks for a group. As she waited for the machine to finish, she stood still for a rare moment of rest. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Her eyes drifted again to the piano. He couldn't help but imagine her sitting at it after closing time. When the lights were dim and no one was around, maybe she played to clear her mind. Maybe she played to feel at peace. Or maybe she played because it was the one place she could be fully herself as the evening continued. More customers came in, shaking off the rain and settling into the warm space. The restaurant filled slowly, but the calm atmosphere remained. The waitress moved around the tables with steady steps, answering questions and carrying plates with practiced ease. A young woman near the counter asked her, "Do you always play like that?" The waitress shook her head quickly. "Not really. Only sometimes." "But you should," the woman said kindly. "You're very good." The waitress smiled shyly again, saying nothing else before continuing on with her work. He watched the interaction with interest. It was clear she wasn't used to being noticed for anything other than her job. Music was a part of her, but a quiet part she didn't show often. The rain outside softened again, turning into a light drizzle. The windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. The man felt his eyes grow heavy, not from tiredness, but from the comfort of the moment. It had been a long time since he had sat somewhere and simply observed life happening around him. He picked up his glass again, taking one last sip of water. He felt a small sense of connection to the room, to the simple chatter, to the rain outside, and even to the waitress, someone he didn't know but felt strangely grateful for. He wasn't sure if she would play again. He didn't expect her to. The moment earlier felt like something rare, something she didn't offer often, and maybe that was why it felt so special. The clock above the counter ticked softly, marking each second with steady patience. The evening didn't feel ordinary anymore, but it wasn't dramatic either. It was the quiet kind of special, the kind that stays with a person without making a big scene. The waitress walked by him one last time, and he caught her eye. She gave him a polite smile, the same one she had been giving customers all evening. But now he saw a little more behind, a bit of warmth. Maybe even a hint of relief that people appreciated her music. He didn't know what the rest of the night would bring. But one thing was clear, the evening had changed. The ordinary had shifted into something unexpected. And all it took was a moment of bravery from someone who didn't even realize how much she had affected the room. The piano stood quietly in the corner, its wooden frame catching the soft glow of the lights. It almost seemed like it was waiting, ready to sing again whenever she chose to touch the keys. For now, though, the restaurant settled back into its gentle rhythm. The man remained seated, content to stay a little longer, letting the soft drizzle and warm atmosphere carry him into the rest of the night. The rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle, the kind that made the night feel calmer rather than colder. The restaurant lights reflected softly on the windows, making the room feel even warmer. People chatted in low voices, some still thinking about the unexpected music earlier. The evening had taken on a different tone, peaceful, thoughtful, almost comforting. The man in the corner remained seated, even though he had already finished his meal. Something inside him didn't want to leave yet. He watched the waitress move around the tables, and though she looked tired, there was a new ease in her steps. Maybe the music had relaxed her the same way it relaxed everyone else. A couple near the window asked for the bill, and she brought it with her usual soft smile. One of them said something about her playing, and the man saw her nod shyly again. Even from across the room, he could sense her quiet humility. It seemed clear she wasn't used to being the center of attention. After taking care of the couple, the waitress went to the small sink near the counter and washed her hands. She stood for a moment, adjusting her hair behind her ear. Then, without rushing, she walked toward the piano again. The man sat forward slightly in surprise. He hadn't expected her to return to it so soon. But she didn't sit down this time. She simply placed her hand on the top of the piano, resting her fingers gently along the wooden surface as if she were greeting an old friend. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant for an audience. It was just a small, quiet moment between her and the instrument. He found himself watching her more closely than he intended. A few customers glanced her way too, but most people were busy eating or talking. The soft hum of conversation returned, but the atmosphere remained gentle. When she turned away from the piano and walked back toward the tables, her fingertips still seemed to carry some of the music with them. The man wondered if she was debating whether to play again, or maybe she had simply needed to touch the keys for reassurance. He wasn't sure why he cared so much about a stranger's small gestures, but somehow her quiet presence made the evening feel meaningful. A family with 2 kids entered the restaurant, shaking off water from their jackets. The waitress greeted them and seated them near the counter. The youngest child immediately noticed the piano and stared at it with wide eyes. The mother whispered something to him, probably telling him not to touch it. The waitress brought them menus, and the child pointed at the piano again. She smiled and said something the man couldn't hear, but whatever she said made the boy grin. Then she walked back toward the kitchen to grab water for them as she passed the man's table. He gave her a small nod, just a simple acknowledgement of the earlier music. She met his eyes for a moment before continuing on with her tasks. The kitchen door swung open as the cook stepped out to hand her a tray of dishes. She balanced it carefully and took it to a group sitting near the center of the room. As she served them, a couple of other customers commented on the rain. "It's supposed to last all night," one said. "Good thing we're already inside," another replied. The waitress placed the plates down gently and asked if anyone needed anything else. When they said no, she walked away with a calm stride. Back in his corner, The man took a slow breath, listening to the soft mix of rain and conversation. The earlier silence had felt heavy, but now the room seemed full of small, gentle sounds that blended together in a comforting way. He caught sight of the piano again. Its dark wooden frame looked almost elegant under the soft yellow lights. It wasn't a grand piano or anything special. It was old, slightly scratched, and probably out of tune in a few places. But somehow, that made it feel alive. Like it had a story, just like the waitress probably had. He wondered again how long she had been working there. Was she helping her family? Saving for something? Trying to balance work with something she loved? There was something about her that suggested she carried more weight than she showed. The manager walked up to her and handed her a warm drink. She thanked him quietly and took a sip before continuing her work. He watched her carefully for a moment, his expression softening. It was clear the staff cared about her. After another 20 minutes, the crowd in the restaurant shifted. Some people left, others came in, and the energy changed once again. The drizzle outside wasn't harsh enough to keep people away. The waitress wiped down an empty table near the piano, bending slightly to collect crumbs and straighten the chairs. As she stood up, her eyes landed on the piano again, and she paused. Just for a second, the man watched her hesitation closely. Then, to his surprise, she pulled the bench out again. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't check if anyone was watching. She simply sat down and placed her drink on the small ledge beside the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Trembling slightly this time, she wasn't as confident as earlier. He wondered if she was thinking too much, thinking about the customers, thinking about the attention, thinking about whether she should be doing this at all. But then she took a slow breath, pressed the first key. The sound was soft again, gentle and warm. A few people looked up from their meals, but most continued talking. The music filled the room without overpowering it. He felt himself relax into the moment. The notes came slowly at first, spaced out like someone thinking out loud. Then they grew smoother, forming a melody that felt calm and reflective. Her shoulders loosened. Her posture softened. Her eyes focused on the keys, but sometimes she closed them briefly, letting the music guide her. It felt like she wasn't playing for the customers this time. She was playing for herself. The man found himself thinking about how rare moments like this were. People often hide the parts of themselves that matter most. Work, responsibilities, and life's noise can bury their passions. But here she was, letting her music rise above everything, even if only for a short time. The child from earlier turned around in his seat, watching her with fascination. His mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder, but she didn't tell him to turn back. She watched too, her expression soft. A couple sitting near the counter lowered their voices, listening more closely. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen window to see what was happening. The man rested his arms on the table and leaned forward. He wasn't thinking about anything else now. Not work, not the rain, not the passing hours. His mind settled into the rhythm of the notes. She shifted to a different melody, something slightly faster, but still gentle. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, gliding across the keys as if they knew exactly where they wanted to go. The restaurant felt alive again, through noise, through feeling. A deeper connection seemed to link the people in the room, as if the music was stitching together a shared moment they didn't know they needed. The man thought about how strange and wonderful it was that someone who spent most of her time clearing tables and carrying dishes could hold so much talent inside her. He wondered how many people in the world lived the same way, quiet on the surface, full of beauty underneath. The rain softened further until it was barely audible. The sound of the piano filled the silence it left behind. After a few more minutes, she slowed the melody, letting the last notes trail off softly. Her hands rested on the keys for a moment before she pulled them away. There was no applause this time. People were listening, yes, but not in a way that demanded a performance. It felt more intimate, like a shared secret. She sat quietly, breathing slowly, before getting up from the bench. She didn't look around to see who had been watching. She simply picked up her drink and walked back toward the tables. The man caught her eye as she passed. She seemed surprised for a second, then gave him a small, almost grateful smile. He returned it. She went back to work, her steps lighter than before. The music had relaxed her, too. Her shoulders weren't as tense, and her movements seemed more natural. The restaurant eased back into its normal rhythm against oft chatter, clinking dishes, the quiet hum of lights, but the energy remained warm, as if the music still lingered in the air. The man realized he felt almost reluctant to leave. Something about the evening felt rare. It wasn't just the music, but the feeling that he had witnessed something honest. He stood slowly and placed a few bills under his empty glass. As he put on his jacket, he glanced toward the piano. It sat quietly again, its presence no longer surprising. He walked toward the door, but paused and looked back one last time. The waitress was wiping down another table, humming softly under her breath. Her hum matched the rhythm of the song she had just played. He stepped outside into the cool evening air. The drizzle had stopped completely now. The street shone softly under the streetlights, and the world felt a little gentler. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or whether he would return to the restaurant soon. But he knew one thing for sure. Something simple had turned into something unforgettable, and it all began because a waitress decided to sit at an old piano on an ordinary evening. The night grew calmer after the man stepped outside. But inside the restaurant, the warmth continued. The waitress carried on with her work, her steps steady and her expression soft, as if the music she played earlier still echoed inside her. She didn't look for attention, and she didn't act as if anything special had happened. To her, maybe it was just a moment. To everyone else, it was something gentle and memorable. The customers slowly changed as time passed. Some left, others arrived, bringing with them the sound of soft conversation and the damp smell of light rain. The restaurant had a way of comforting people even before they sat down. It wasn't fancy, but it felt familiar, safe, and warm. The waitress moved around the tables, wiping refilling glasses and taking orders. Her routine seemed the same as always, yet there was a calmness in her posture that hadn't been there earlier. The music she played had softened her mood, and even when she was tired, she carried a quiet peace. Around 8, a group of coworkers entered the restaurant. They took their seats near the window, talking loudly at first, but even they lowered their voices after settling into the relaxed atmosphere. The waitress greeted them and effortlessly guided them through the menu. Her tone was friendly but gentle, never too loud, never too rushed. When she brought their drinks, one of them asked, "Was that you playing the piano earlier?" She nodded slowly, her eyes dropping for a moment. "Only a little. The speaker wasn't working. So, well, it was beautiful," one of the women said, with a warm smile. The waitress smiled, too small, shy, but sincere. "Thank you." She walked away to take care of another table, but the softness in her smile lingered. The night continued to move quietly. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the sidewalks outside shiny, but still. A gentle breeze passed through the door each time someone walked in or out, carrying the smell of wet pavement. Later, as the evening slowed down and fewer customers remained, the restaurant grew quieter. The waitress leaned against the counter for a moment, giving herself a chance to rest. Her eyes drifted to the piano again. She didn't walk toward it this time. She just looked at it gently, her thoughts somewhere far away. While she stood there, the door chimed softly, and a man entered the restaurant, told her, maybe in his late 60s. He closed his umbrella and shook off the drops before walking in. His coat looked worn but clean. He carried himself with calm dignity. The waitress straightened her posture and greeted him with a polite smile. "Good evening," he smiled back, his eyes kind. "Evening." She led him to a table near the corner, the same one the earlier customer had sat at. He settled in, placing his umbrella beside the chair. "Would you like something warm to drink?" She asked. "Tea would be nice," he replied. She nodded and went to prepare it. While he waited, he looked around the restaurant, observing everything with slow, thoughtful eyes. They landed on the piano in the corner. He tilted his head slightly as if studying it. When the waitress brought his tea, he thanked her gently. "Busy night?" he asked. "Not too much," she replied. "Just steady." He nodded and took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the warmth. "You have a beautiful piano here," he said. The waitress hesitated for a moment. "Yes, it's old, but still good." "Do you play?" he asked. She looked down shyly. "Sometimes." The man smiled softly, as if he already knew the answer. A few minutes passed quietly. The old man sipped his tea, and the waitress continued her tasks. Only a few customers remained now, speaking softly over their meals. The night outside had grown completely still. Eventually, the man looked at the piano again and then at the waitress. "I used to teach music," he said gently. She paused mid-step, turning to him with a small spark of curiosity. "Really?" "For many years," he said, "and I can always tell when someone has played from the heart." Her expression shifted, her eyes softening. She didn't know how to respond at first. He continued, "You have that look? The look of someone who keeps music close, even if life gets in the way." She swallowed lightly. His words were warm, not intrusive, not demanding. "Just honest? I haven't played much lately," she said quietly. The man nodded with understanding. Life has a way of taking up space. But music waits. It never leaves. The waitress let out a small breath. "I played a little earlier, only because the restaurant felt too quiet." His eyes brightened. "I would have liked to hear that," she offered a shy smile. "It wasn't anything big. Music doesn't need to be big," he replied. "It just needs to be true." Her smile grew a little, though still small. She excused herself politely to finish her work. But something about her steps had changed again. They felt lighter, touched by the man's words. The restaurant continued settling down. The co-workers near the window had finished their meals and left. The family with the little boy had long gone. Only a few customers remained. Sipping their drinks and relaxing into the late hour, the old man finished his tea and placed the cup down silently. He took another slow look around the room, then stood up and walked toward the piano. The waitress noticed immediately. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt him. He reached out and touched the piano gently, almost the same way she had earlier. He lifted the wooden cover and pressed one key lightly. The note was soft and slightly worn, but still clear. He nodded, satisfied. The waitress stepped closer, unsure of what he planned to do. "Do you mind?" he asked her politely. She shook her head. "No, not at all." He sat down on the bench. His posture was straight but relaxed, like someone who had spent many years guiding his hands across keys. He placed his fingers gently on the piano and pressed a few notes. A melody began, soft, slow, thoughtful. It had the weight of years behind it, but also a gentle warmth. The man played with the ease of someone who understood not just music, but life. The waitress stood beside the counter, watching him with quiet admiration. She had not expected this. The customers left in the restaurant lowered their voices, listening. His music wasn't fancy or complicated. It was simple, but it carried a deep calm. It felt like a memory, something full of kindness. The waitress closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle around her. When he finished, he lifted his hands from the keys and let them rest in his lap. The room felt full. Even in its quietness, he stood slowly and closed the cover of the piano. The waitress walked toward him. "That was beautiful," she said softly. He gave her a warm, humble smile. "Thank you." "You play with feeling," she said. "So do you," he replied. Her eyes lowered again, touched by his words. Then he said, "You should keep playing, even if only for yourself." She nodded gently. He gave her a small bow of his head before returning to his seat. A few moments later, he asked for the bill, and she brought it to him. He paid, leaving a generous tip, then put on his coat and took his umbrella. Before leaving, he looked toward the piano once more, then at her. "Music chooses people," he said softly, "not the other way around." With that, he walked out into the quiet night. The waitress stood near the piano for a long moment after he left. The words stayed with her, warm and steady. She reached out and touched the piano gently, the way the old man had. The restaurant was nearly empty now, and her shift would end soon. But she didn't feel as tired as she had earlier. She pulled out the bench and sat down slowly. For a long moment, she didn't play anything. She just sat there, breathing quietly, listening to the faint echo of what had happened tonight, the man's music, her own earlier melodies. The quiet encouragement that felt like a bridge between two strangers. Then, with a soft inhale, she placed her fingers on the keys. This time, she played a melody that was new, not something practiced, not something copied, something of her own. The sound rose gently through the nearly empty room, carrying her feelings, her thoughts. And the quiet strength she rarely showed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as she played, the night outside seemed to hold its breath once more. The moment he stepped out of the restaurant that night, he felt something inside him shift in a way he could not fully explain. The air outside was cool and smelled of wet roads. While the sky was still cloudy, the rain had calmed down to a soft drizzle. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement, turning the night into something gentle and peaceful. He walked slowly, replaying the music in his mind, still feeling every note as if it were echoing in his chest. It was strange how an ordinary evening had turned into a memory he already knew he would keep close. He usually drove straight, home without thinking much about anything. Most nights were predictable, quiet, and uneventful. But tonight felt different. He paused near his car, taking one more look through the restaurant's front window. Inside, the staff moved around as they always did, bringing plates to tables and wiping counters. Everything looked normal again, almost unchanged. And yet, he knew something meaningful had happened. Even if the world around him acted like nothing special had occurred, he carried the feeling that he had witnessed a moment that mattered. As he opened his car door, he hesitated, not ready to leave just yet. There was a warmth inside him he didn't want to let fade. He leaned on the door and watched people walk down the sidewalk. Some hurried to avoid the drizzle, while others seemed to enjoy the calm weather. Life moved around him the same as every other day, but it didn't feel the same to him now. He thought about how something so simple, a young waitress sitting at an old piano, could change the entire mood of a room. After a few minutes, he finally got into his car and started driving home. The roads were quiet, with only a few cars passing by. The wipers moved slowly across the windshield, brushing away the light drizzle. Instead of listening to the radio like he normally did, he kept everything silent. He wanted the quiet so he could hear the memory of the music again. The soft notes, the gentle pauses. The way her hands had moved with confidence, he could picture it all clearly. When he reached home, he turned off the engine but stayed inside the car for a moment. He rested his hands on the steering wheel and let out a long breath. It was strange how someone he didn't even know could affect him like this. Maybe it wasn't just her music. Maybe it was what it represented: effort, passion, and a hidden part of someone's life that most people never get to see. He finally stepped out of the car and walked to his front door. The house was quiet as usual when he entered. He put his keys on the table and removed his jacket. For some time, he simply stood in the middle of the living room, feeling the quiet around him. He usually turned on the TV or checked his phone, but he didn't feel the need to do that tonight. Instead, he sat on the couch, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He found himself thinking about the waitress again, in a personal way, but in a thoughtful one. He wondered how many people had talents or dreams hidden beneath their daily responsibilities. He thought about how she must have practiced for years, how she must have learned from someone, or maybe taught herself. Yet there she was, serving tables every day while a whole piece of her life went unnoticed. He respected that. It made him think about how many of his own strengths he never used anymore. The next day, he woke up with the same calm feeling he had carried home the night before. He went through his routine, but everything felt lighter. Even simple tasks like making breakfast or preparing for work had a different energy to them. He caught himself smiling for no real reason. He liked that. It reminded him that good things didn't always need to be big or dramatic. Sometimes they were hidden in small, unexpected places. As the day went on, he continued to think about the restaurant. The moment he saw the piano, the way she looked nervous before placing her hands on the keys, and how everything shifted when she began to play, all of it played in his mind like scenes from a movie. He realized how rare it was to witness something so real and unfiltered. When evening arrived, he found himself considering whether he should go back to the restaurant. He wasn't sure if it was a good idea. He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable or think he was showing up just because of her. He debated it for some time, pacing around the living room, telling himself he was only thinking about grabbing dinner. But deep down, he knew he wanted to see if anything else would happen, even if nothing special actually did. He finally decided to go. He convinced himself it was harmless, and that maybe he simply needed a calm space after another long day of work. When he arrived, the restaurant looked almost exactly as it had the night before. The warm lights, the hum of soft voices, the smell of simple but comforting food, all of it felt familiar. He took a seat at the same table and glanced toward the piano. It sat quietly, untouched. He realized that what he had witnessed the night before wasn't just entertainment. It was a moment born from a problem, the music system failing. The awkward silence that followed, and her quiet decision to step in, it had been spontaneous, not planned. That made it even more special. The waitress walked by and recognized him. She offered a friendly smile, the same simple smile she had given countless customers before, but he could tell she seemed a little surprised to see him again. Not in a negative way, more in a curious one. She took his order, and as she walked away, he wondered whether she knew the impact her playing had left on him. He spent the rest of the evening enjoying his meal. Nothing extraordinary happened this time, and honestly, he didn't expect it to. But that was perfectly fine. Sometimes, he thought, the beauty of a moment lies in its rarity. Before leaving, he thanked her again, just for the service, but also for the music from the previous night. She looked a bit shy and told him she didn't really play often anymore, but she appreciated that it meant something to him. Her voice was soft when she spoke, like she wasn't used to being complimented on her playing. He noticed that she seemed more comfortable talking about everyday things than talking about her talent. As he walked out, he felt grateful that he had come back, even if nothing dramatic happened. It reminded him that moments don't have to repeat themselves to stay special. Some memories are meant to exist just once. Later that night, he sat at home once again, thinking about how much one small event could change a person's outlook. He realized that many days in life passed without leaving any strong impression. People got used to their routines, their schedules, their usual habits. But sometimes, without warning, something beautiful appeared, like a spark breaking through the normal pattern, reminding them that the world still had surprises. That night had taught him to notice more, to look deeper, to appreciate hidden talents in the people around him, to value simple acts that carried sincerity. And above all, it reminded him that life didn't need to be extraordinary all the time. It just needed moments, small, genuine ones that made people feel connected. Over the next weeks, he found himself approaching life differently. He listened more when people talked. He paid attention to small details and places he used to overlook. He felt more patient, calmer, and somehow more present. He didn't try to force anything extraordinary to happen. Instead, he opened himself to appreciate what was already there. The memory of the waitress playing the piano stayed with him, not because it was perfect or spectacular, but because it was honest. It was a reminder that everyone carried a story much bigger than what others saw on the surface. In the end, that evening became one of his favorite memories, not because of where he was or what he was doing, but because it showed him something he needed to be reminded of. That beauty could appear quietly, that people held pieces of themselves they rarely shared, that even on days that seemed plain and predictable, something meaningful could happen. And long after the sound of her piano faded, the feeling it gave him stayed, gently shaping the way he experienced life from that day on.